Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Imaginate's digital delegate encounter. Let's talk about sex. Please remain mute and turn off your video when arriving so you can get the best experience of this event. To get the best speaker view throughout the event, we would ask you to hide non-video participants. We have shared how to do this in the chat, and we'll share again in the chat for people who might just have arrived in the next moment or so. The event will be signed by Yvonne Strain and Janice Murdoch and captioned by Karen Crean. If you would like to access captions, please press the CC button at the bottom of your screen and the captions should automatically come up. If you have any issues, please just say. Our BSL interpreters will always be seen. When there is a video being shared, if you would like BSL, please pin Yvonne and Janice. If you have any questions for our speakers throughout the event, there will be a 20 minutes after the presentations and discussion. Please add them into the chat throughout and we will collect them to ask the speakers. This event is being recorded. The only time you will be asked to put your video on is to ask a question. If you're not comfortable with this, don't worry. Either someone else can ask the question or you can keep your video off and ask it just with your microphone. If at any point anybody wants help with something, please just post in the chat feed and someone from Imaginate team will be there to answer your questions or help. Lastly, these events are presented for free, so please consider giving a donation to Imaginate to help cover the costs of the events and future projects that we do. You can donate through the Imaginate website and we'll share a link again at the end and at the end of the event. Thank you and enjoy. And I'll just pass you over to Fiona Ferguson, who will be our host for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam, and a warm welcome to all of you, wherever you are, in whichever time zone you are. It's January 2021, in the middle of a global pandemic. So I am comforting myself with coffee in my favourite mug with my little 10-month-old nephew on it and my slippers. So I hope you can do the same and relax where you are. What's going to happen this afternoon is we'll hear about 4 different projects, all of which are either in development or have already premiered. They're all performances for young audiences, for children, for teens, that explore sex and or bodies. We're going to ask the artists to present each project individually, and then I'll ask all 7 artists to come back and we will have a discussion. And then, as Pam said, there'll be 20 minutes roughly for you to ask any questions. So the best way, because I'm sure we won't get through all questions, is that as they come into your head, write them into the chat and one of our team will copy that and send to me. Right at the end, we will then have an opportunity to switch our cameras on if we choose to, wave, say hello, feel that sense of community that we are, and have a little boogie. So with no further waiting, could I ask Lucy Ireland and Jim Manganello of Shotput to put their cameras on, and they will talk to you. Hello. They will talk to you about their project, Untitled Discotheque Project.
Thanks, Fiona.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy.
I'm Jim.
And we are co-artistic directors of Shotput. We also have another person in the Shotput world, which is Helen, who is here somewhere. Shotput is a dance theatre company and we were founded in 2018 and we're Glasgow based. And our work is, we're generally interested in the shadowier corners of human relationships.
That is probably why we decided to make a project about teenagers and sex. We were interested in sort of the risk behind that, and we thought it could start an interesting conversation. So that project became the Untitled Discotheque Project, which used to be its working title, but we think it's its actual title now. And we started developing that through the accelerator program at Imaginate, which is a development program for ideas to get them towards full production, not to full production, but towards full production. And in a nutshell, the performance part of that project is it's sort of like a school disco, where all the feelings that usually might be repressed inside the teens who are at a school disco are very much on the surface. So feelings of lust and fear and anxiety and heartbreak are just a little bit more on the skin. We were making that with a really big team, our biggest team yet, a video designer, DJ, and an ensemble, some of whom are here, and then COVID hit. So we needed to rethink how we were gonna do what was, and still will be, a project involving lots of people differently.
Yeah, and as part of our time with Imaginate, we started talking to teenagers, and we just really loved doing that. So when COVID entered our lives, we knew we couldn't work physically, but we didn't want to stop being creative on it. So, and we thought the teenagers that we had talked to already said some really interesting things. So we thought, let's make something of that. So we made a podcast, which is called The Slow Dance. And we interviewed over autumn 2020, we interviewed about 35 to 40 teenagers from Scotland and also from Denmark and Norway. And we chatted to them over Zoom. And we thought we would like to share 3 main points from our experience.
Yeah, and we've given those points some snappy titles just to keep you awake. The first point is a darker truth. So this has something to do with what Lucy was saying earlier, that as people, I think we're really attracted to the stuff that usually exists in the shadows. And when the interviews for the podcast were at their most successful, I'd say it was because the teenagers went off script. Like there's a certain amount of things that teenagers are going to say about sex. They're horny, they want to have it, they're not having it, they're having too much of it. All of this you could probably write yourself before you listen to the podcast. But there were really interesting moments, interesting to me at least, where teenagers would depart from that script. And I'm thinking of an example, we'll play a clip in a minute, where it often came up that teenagers send nude photos of each other on social media or just through texting. And obviously the teenagers wanted to perform to us, the adults in the room, that this is a bad thing. But we often, especially the girls that we spoke to, I'd say, often spin that on its head. And yeah, I'll let them speak for themselves in a moment.
Yeah, I think it got to a point where the teenagers stopped saying what they think we wanted to hear and actually just started saying what they thought and why they did some certain things. Our second title is Please Talk to Us. So naturally, we thought it was going to be hard to get teenagers involved in a podcast about sex. And it was. But how we managed to get them was instead of we tried getting teenagers interested through call outs, but that didn't work. So what we found helped was that each organization that we worked with or school, they would go individually to a teenager to ask them if they'd like to be involved in the podcast, which then I think there's that they already had a relationship with that teenager, which felt important in order to get them. to come to the podcast interview. And secondly, we found that the podcast attracted mainly young women. So we found it really hard to get straight men on board. We did get some in the end, but it was harder.
Yeah, which could be interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
Third and final thing that we'll talk about for now is a question, which is sex still analog? This came about because the original idea behind the project as a whole, the performance side and the podcast side, was to talk about teenagers, sex, and thirdly, technology, and how technology worked within there, social media more specifically. But what was interesting in the podcast interviews, interesting again to me at least, was that the teenagers very rarely spoke about social media or any technology. Most of what they were talking about was still very tactile experience. And so it left me with a question that I'm still exploring, which is, was the absence of tech talk because sex is still an analog activity? Or is it that technology and social media shoots through so much of their life that it would be like the fish talking about the water that they're swimming in? And that's something that I think we need to keep unpicking.
Yeah, so we're currently in the editing stages of the podcast, which we're going to release mid-February, but we would like to share some excerpts of the podcast with you. So the first excerpt is two teenagers talking about sending pics or pictures online.
The audio might be a little bit faint. Apologies for that. You might want to turn your volume up if it's not all the way up.
Because I feel like if there's, with the pictures, in some ways, because it does open your mind to it. So then you think about that person in that way more, and it opens up conversations, and it opens up the barrier in a way that you haven't got to be in person to do it. Because it can be very nerve-wracking in person to make that first move. But with photos, you're in your own room, you're in your own space, you can make yourself look however you want to, and you can start it at your own pace instead of being in person and it being full on, like straight away.
I think there's also when you are sending photos that are not extremely revealing, and like you said, you may be showing a bit of bra strap or a bit more skin. There's a lot of tension that you're building with those photos. And I think, yeah.
These two.
Okay, so those were two teenagers in Scotland, and this next clip is I think you just hear the voice of one teenager in Norway.
Yeah.
And we had asked them why is it that sex and love looms so large in the teenage imagination? So at the beginning, when she says these two topics, she's talking about sex and love.
Two topics are still so full of secrets. Joy or anger or frustrations are feelings that are easier to talk about and easier to sort of, if you're really joyful, I see it and I know what it is and I can relate. But love and sex is still something so extremely personal. So as long as we can't get it out and express it sort of in a more concrete way, it stays inside and it fills us. And it's just so overwhelming and so big, and it demands so much attention. So I think maybe, at least to me, a part of the reason why these things are still so big and I still sort of admire them so much is because they're still so full of secrets to me, and I still don't know what it is.
So yeah, that's about all we've got. You'll probably be relieved to know. Just the last thing we wanted to say was that this whole experience of working on the podcast has really changed how we conceive of making work in the future. We've really enjoyed we've really enjoyed interacting with real young people throughout the process rather than at the end of it or just the beginning. And so we're kind of in a process of redefining how we make work, and also how we define what the totality of the work is. Thanks.
I mean, you'd think by now I had really excellent control of mute and microphone. Thank you. I feel like I know a lot about your project through Accelerator, but one of the things I was thinking there is it's interesting that it's kind of like COVID landed, because actually you were going to share a work in progress of this piece at Festival in May 20. And you really quickly adapted to thinking about the podcast. And so I'm kind of, I suppose, interested in, has potentially that experience changed your practice of how you might make work in, because the podcast, I'm right in saying, didn't exist as an idea until COVID.
Yeah, I think the podcast was always bubbling, but that was mainly because the DJ who is working on our show is also a podcast editor. So we were like, oh, maybe we could do that. But I don't think it would have happened as early on in the process.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we were already talking to teenagers as research for the piece, but we didn't see it as a public facing thing. So I guess the real shift was, oh, that this could be not just after the show, or to put it really crudely, this could be a thing not just to get bums on seats, but it could be a piece of work in its own right. And that certainly has changed the way we think about making work in the future.
Yeah.
We're doing that right now with another, but because of COVID, also, we have another project that we're working on, can't really be working on physically, but there's a component that that we can be doing given the current circumstances.
Yeah, and I'm right in saying that the podcast will be something that if we're coming to see your show, we can then listen to the podcast.
Yeah, you can listen to the podcast in a few weeks.
Yeah.
We hope.
How many hours did you say of podcast footage you're editing?
Oh, it's a lot.
It's probably like 30 hours.
Yeah.
30 hours of footage, and we're putting it down into 5 episodes that have 5 like 15 to 20 minute episodes. So it's quite a lot of editing.
And what makes it even harder is that each of the interviews were about an hour to an hour and a half. And then we have each of the individual teenagers' audio as well. So that's our audio plus 35 teens' audio to go through.
Yeah. One last question for now. I was interested in any differences that you found between teenagers in different countries, but also between what teenagers are saying and what you experienced when you were a teenager, which is not that long ago.
Yeah, there were a couple of differences between the Scottish teens and the Scandinavian teens. So we asked right at the start of every interview, when did they first experience feelings of love and lust? And the trend seemed to be that the Scottish teenagers would only say a couple of years ago. So when it would start when puberty hits, so 13, 14, 15, whereas the Scandinavian teens always went right back to their early years. So as early as 3 or 4, which was interesting.
Well, I feel like you could psychoanalyze that.
Yeah.
To answer the other part of your question, our experience as teenagers versus theirs, one of the things that we found would definitely get a rise out of them was when I would mention that I used to had to call up my girlfriend's parents. Like, you called the house phone and you said, is Andrea there? And they were like, I could never do that. And I was like, yes, not so long ago, you had to call the house phone.
Yeah.
So I guess the point there is how much more direct the communication is between them than it was for me.
Yeah. And we should probably say a big thank you to the EU project team, because I think the teenagers in Norway and Denmark we found through Scenekunstbruket and Teatercentrum, who are part of this teen project connecting teenagers in Europe. So I've got a million more questions, but I'm going to try and stop. And I'm going to ask Lisa and Gilda of Kroppsklubben to come and join us. And they are going to talk about the work that they do, and in particular, a production called Puff.
Yes. Hey, do you hear us and see us? I guess so.
Yes. Hello.
Hi, my name is Gilda.
And my name is Lisa.
And we are Kroppsklubben, which means the body club. And we are an independent dance group in the very south of Sweden, in a city called Malmö. We create dance performances for kids, teenagers, and adults. And they're all focused on different body parts. And 2017, we premiered our first show. It was called Lår, thighs. I'll show my thigh here, exactly. This body part. And last year, in September 2020, we were really lucky because we could premiere our second show, FOF, the performance about the cunt. So, föreställningen om fittan in Swedish. And that's the show that we're going to talk about today. This target group is from 10 to 12. And the Thai show is for a bit older, 12 to 15. But we chose to have a younger audience for this show. And yes, we'll start with the word. So, cunt. It's a very strong and abusive word. And we think it's the equivalent word to fitta, the Swedish word. And we chose to use this very strong and abusive word because we were interested in like, why is there such a bad word for this body part? Like, how does this affect us and people around us? Like, not having a positive or an easygoing word for this body part. And we felt also that if we are in our 30s, we were lacking a lot of information about the body part. And so these two things was our starting points to create the show. So the word, very strong, abusive, not having a neutral word, or like not too childish or sweet or clinical, versus also not having so much information or enough information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we wanted to make a performance that is informative and giving a lot of information about the anatomy of the body part. And we wanted to make a performance that is reclaiming this strong word by using it over and over again in the performance. In the start of the process, we ourselves found it really hard to say this word. We knew that we wanted to make the project, but when people asked us, so what's your next body part? We got super nervous about the word and felt like it was really hard to say, even for us. And also when we started with writing the applications, we thought like, this is too strong. And this feeling made us feel like this is something we really need to do.
That's
like
why we have to do it.
Yeah, and this is work that needs to be done. So when we had our first residency 1 year ago, we in the very beginning of the process, we invited a school class to come for a residency showing, and they cancelled just the day before when they got our email about the subject and the information about the project. And then we realized that we had to think again in what way we talk about the project, how we communicate, and what words we choose. So we decided to include another word in the title. So the original title is The Performance About the Count, and then we added the more childish, sweet, innocent word snippa in Swedish, which is maybe flower or lady garden, something like this in English. We did this as a gateway to be able to communicate with especially the adults, the teachers, the parents, and also be able to talk to people about the project without being rejected immediately because of the word. And this really worked. Yeah. It was really working as a gateway to be able to say the other word that is quite common here in Sweden. But in the actual show, we were all the time sticking to the initial word, the strong one, the count, because the main point was to reclaim that one. And we had this super nice situation after the premiere when all the children went out, and we were staying there with a lot of people from the industry, and we were sitting there talking, and everyone, like the adults and our colleagues and people in their 50s and 60s, were all talking about the count, like super relaxed, which was super nice.
Like 40 minutes of count show, and
yeah.
they're talking about the count,
yeah.
like, as if nothing.
Yeah.
So great.
Yes. And we wanted to make a performance that is kind, funny, not provocative, but very informative and giving knowledge about this body part, being undramatic and easygoing. And now we will show our trailer to you.
Yes. Share. There we go. Yes. Stop sharing. So,
thank you.
I hope you'll saw. I think that's all what we have for presentation, and we're ready for the questions.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions to ask now, and then we can talk more later. But one of the things I was interested in is, even within our team, your show then led to really interesting discussions about the use of the word cunt, and still some people can't say it. So I wondered, obviously you spoke a bit about the post-show responses, but I just wondered what range of responses you've had.
Like if we got a lot of response or
To the word, you mean?
Yeah, or yeah, where did you have people who were really behind you, but also people who were not so happy?
Yes.
No?
We have different both, I would say.
Yeah.
People have been questioning the age.
Yeah, more than the word.
More than the word, but maybe in combination with the word.
Yeah.
Using this strong word to a young age group.
Yeah.
Has been a question.
Yeah. But also we thought that we were gonna be censored, like on internet, or that people were not gonna talk about it or whatever, but we never got censored. Maybe not censored, but maybe sometimes they chose another word.
Yeah.
But we also got a lot of press.
Yeah.
Where they actually wrote
The whole word.
The word.
Yeah. But also we have a big organization in Sweden working with education and the rights of sexual health and reproduction, and they use this word. So, and we have also cooperated with them in the project. So we felt like we were supported by them in that sense, and also that I think there is a movement of using this word that is already going on. So we are not the first ones in that sense.
Yeah.
Using it.
So you don't feel alone
No.
in making that. Yeah.
Very supported having done that.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was interesting when you were talking to me before is actually the connection between responses to the previous show about thigh and why that led you to make FUF.
Yes, exactly. So we were doing the show about the thighs, and where we are, I wanted to like show a bit, but it's easier to, where we're like spreading our legs a lot, like we're sitting down.
And also doing this, hello.
Yeah, like showing our thighs in different, like we have shorts on. Exactly, here's the picture of the show. Like we're showing the thighs in ways that you're not usually seeing this body part, and for the like a bit older teenagers, and their reactions during the show was like, "Ooh, pussy, pussy, pussy."
They were catcalling.
They were like, "Oh, the door is open, guys." They were referring a lot to the crowd.
Yeah.
And that's where we felt like, oh, let's do it. That's also like a big starting.
Yeah. And finally, a very straightforward question: which body part next?
It's the skin.
Skin.
Yeah, but it's related to the pandemic. Yeah. Pandemic. And like in relation to social distancing, like how are we gonna be able to touch each other?
Yeah.
Having touched each other or being touched. Sure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We will talk again very soon. I'm going to ask Mamoru Iriguchi and Lee Brody to join us. Over to you guys.
Hello. We're going to start with the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm just going to share screen. So hello, I am Mamoru Iriguchi, lead artist of Sex Education Explorers, or SEX. SEX will be an entertaining and informative show that embraces our diverse gender identities and sexualities from an evolutionary viewpoint. It is aimed at ages 12 to 15. The show will be presented by 2 LGBTQ+ performers. We have additional LGBTQ+ artists involved in this project, including Lee Brody as dramaturg, who is with me today. We aim to bring SEX directly into classrooms to share it with as many young people as possible. There will also be a Q&A where pupils can ask questions to the performers. Scotland is making all state schools teach LGBT+ inclusive curriculum, and our intention is that teachers can use SEX as part of the curriculum. The piece was for Edinburgh Fringe 2020, it was cancelled, and we now aim for Fringe 2021 as part of Made in Scotland Showcase. I would briefly like to introduce myself because the question, who am I, has driven this project forward. I'm a cis male, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm gay. But gradually, my gender has drifted towards non-binary and pronouns to he, them, not because I feel wrong in my own body, but because nobody is 100% male or female. Questioning of my own gender identity is now likely to be featured in the show. I'm a performance maker based in Edinburgh, Scotland. I studied animal behavior and evolution at university. It is tragic if the principal theory of your study, i.e. neo-Darwinism, doesn't justify your own identity. No wonder my BSc results were rubbish. As an artist, I like my shows to offer new viewpoints. For example, in Eton, my show for ages 6+, themes like food chains and digestion are explored by both the eater and the eaten, and also by the digested and excreted. Accessibility, boldness, and humor are hugely important to me too. So that's me. Now I'd like to introduce my collaborators. I think my co-performer Afton is actually here today. Afton, want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, my name's Afton. I'm non-binary. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as queer.
Thank you, Afton. And Lou?
Hi everyone, I'm Lou. I'm a cisgendered woman, so I use he, her, she pronouns. I've also got red hair and I'm white, as you can see there, but today I am wearing a black shirt with some silver hoop earrings in, and I'm going to join you as part of the Q&A portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Lou. So, what will the show be like? Our unused copy for the last year's Fringe seemed to be still valid. So a time travel ride through the evolution of sexes, celebrating our diverse gender identities and sexualities for teenagers and everyone else who missed the sex education they deserved. I feel that SEX must start from somewhere everyone can agree. And then we walk into more complex issues with a hope to get somewhere we can all comfortably respect everyone's self-identified gender and sexuality. As a former zoology student, I'd like this starting point to be sexual reproduction. There seems to be some confusion about biological sex, and I suspect that's because there is a slight misunderstanding of sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction simply means a kind of reproduction that begins from an encounter between a sperm and an egg. This is indeed binary because there are only two kinds of reproductive cells, or gametes, sperms and eggs, and nothing in between. But this is where the binary really ends, because by definition, sexual reproduction does not specify who provides the sperm and or eggs. In many species, gamete providers are far from binary. So, if you'd like to know the biological sex of an individual, a human or a cat or a plant, the simplest, clearest way is to ask, which gamete can you provide right now? For example, I am able to supply sperm on demand, and this flower is currently offering sperm too. But once that's done, the same flower will supply eggs. This realization with further research led me to the conclusion that biological sexes are important only for two occasions. A, when you want to reproduce embryos that you would like to inherit your own genes, or B, when you have to explore certain medical conditions with your doctor. For everything else, such as how you identify yourself with the spectrum of gender, within the spectrum of gender, or who you are or aren't sexually attracted to, and how you'd like to develop relationships with others that hopefully offer amazing pleasure and love. For these questions, biology has not reached the stage to offer answers. Or to put it another way, the fun and bonkers world of our sexual behavior is far too complex to be understood by biology alone, because reproduction plays such a small part in it. So this is the essence of the show. I would like SEX to be educational, yet fun, and a spectacular piece of theatre. Costumes will be crucial, simply because we are the only species in the animal kingdom that is so passionate about hiding and revealing flesh. It only makes sense if the performance were what represents nude bodies. This is the prototype I use for Scratch performances. We will make something far better than this, obviously. Finally, a few challenges that this project is facing. It is hugely frustrating and worrying that the toxic transphobic rhetoric is circulating in social media. SEX stands firmly for trans rights and offers no room for doubt. Yet this piece should catalyze conversation with young people who do not necessarily agree with us. On more practical level, SEX should be something that teachers can feel comfortable to accommodate in their classes. Bringing any show into a classroom will raise many logistical questions. The pandemic forced us to give up some of the precious opportunities to work with the young people last year, and it may continue to affect the development. But I remain very excited and hopeful about making something meaningful and sharing SEX with teenagers when it is finally possible. I'd appreciate any insight or advice or questions on these challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. As ever, somehow when we start these, it feels like we've got loads of time and I'm thinking of loads of questions, and now already we're kind of running out of time. I suppose my main question, Mamoru, is some of the people who are joining us today will have probably seen your Scratch. I can't remember when that was, but it's at least 2 years ago now, right? When you came to Ideas Exchange. Yeah. And just thinking about the way in which the idea has developed as a performance idea since then, it'd be really interesting to hear more.
Do you want me to take that, or do you want Mamoru? Do you want me to take? I'll take it.
Mamoru would like you to take that.
I think the idea, from my perspective, I suppose, is a kind of sort of dramaturgical presence, but also as someone who came on board to, I suppose, to facilitate that discussion with the audience, the intended audience of teenagers, is it's not necessarily is that the work keeps sort of changing into something else, but it's more that it keeps expanding the conversation with the intended audience. So I think that's the kind of where the journey is going, is that the conversation with teenagers keeps expanding, and that opportunity to like explore bits of the work with teenagers. So when Mamoru took the work into Leith Academy last year before the pandemic thwarted us, was able to have this relationship with the intended audience and start to figure out what was landing and what wasn't. So that's kind of where the development comes, rather than the pieces sort of radically transformed from the work in progress to where it's at now. I think it's more about just finding like who are the right people to speak. So that's why it's Mamoru and Afton. So it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the kind of environment changed more than us, that in a way the essence of the show hasn't changed at all, but the environment, particularly how the media interpret what's happening on social media, is kind of so that would change us to respond, because it really has to kind of amplify the voice to kind of defend trans rights and all that sort of thing. So it's, that changed the project.
And very specifically, I suppose, for those who are joining us not from Scotland and the UK, because I think unfortunately it's, I could be completely wrong, but it's a especially difficult problem here, is that the conversation around trans rights has become really difficult with projects being attacked on social media. It's happened to other projects, so it's in that context, I think.
Yeah, I think as soon as, I think it's as several of, well, the artists previously sort of mentioned, there's a shock factor that arrives when you place this kind of subject matter next to the word child or youth. There's a sudden, there's an idea that you might be corrupting just by having this conversation without necessarily knowing the content matter or how the sensitivity of how we're approaching it, or how informed and discerning the artists are being in the creation of their work. There's just an assumption that this subject matter doesn't go with children, and I think that in Scotland it's particularly, or in Britain in general, it's particularly hypersensitive at the moment, but I think that is also been around for a long time as well. I don't think we're as far on as our history that we think we are.
No, I mean, I was reflecting on that just in preparation for thinking about today of, you know, we, back in January 2017, we did a push lab on gender and sexual identity and had deeply unpleasant media and online response to that concept. So yeah, even in the last, what's that, 4 years, it feels like it's not necessarily getting better.
So yes, I'd like this piece to kind of empower young people, if they, you know, obviously agree with us, then to sort of look at, this is how logically and scientifically that, you know, and I believe that it's a very small population number of people who are actually actively doing sort of evil things online, but still, I think what's really frustrating is that the media is picking up and sort of amplifying it, and I think that this piece, so that is a huge change that I'd like to have a sort of scientific way to celebrate the diversity. And then that became a more sort of main point of the show, rather than kind of trying to introduce lots of fun facts kind of thing in anymore and all that sort of thing. So that's quite a big shift.
One of the many things that really works about it, because these are facts. Yeah. I would love to talk more, but again, time is against us. So I'll be calling you back very shortly. Could I ask Josie Dale-Jones to come and join me?
Hiya.
Hi. So we've decided to do this section as a chat between us, Josie, so I have a few questions. But first of all, could you just tell us about the Family Sex Show and what motivated you to make it?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, hi, I'm Josie, and I run This Egg, which is a theatre company that I produce, co-create and perform shows with a variety of artistic collaborators for. And one of the shows in development is the Family Sex Show. And I guess, like, in a sentence, it's a collaboratively devised piece that uses movement, personal stories, music and image to reimagine sex education. And I guess, I mean, you've kind of just had a bit of a conversation about it, but the context of sex education in England, which is where I'm based, is that it's optional. So schools don't have to offer it if they don't want to. And parents can take their children out of it if it is offered. And so I guess when it is offered, it's focused on sexually transmitted infections and reproduction, and is heteronormative, and it almost definitely doesn't talk about pleasure. So yeah, started making the show as a response, and in the hope that we can offer an alternative, offline, honest, human sex educational that is like intersectional, feminist, non-binary, and sex positive. Yeah, I guess like keeping the conversation fun and giving it lightness. You know, it's a complicated subject and it's so personal.
Yeah, but I suppose then, unlike some of the other productions that we've heard about, you're not able to link to curriculum if that's something that's not mandatory.
Yeah, if anything, I guess we're doing the opposite. We're like, what does the curriculum not offer, and how can we be the bridge between what we I guess not even like what we think people should know, but what we wish that we'd known, and what is offered.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what we wish we'd known, how many of the schools are actually fueled by that. Is that part of your decision to, because it's very specifically for family audiences, and I'm kind of interested that all of the show, or most of the productions, have thought very specifically about who their audience is, schools or families?
Yeah, I think such a big part of the reasons behind making it is about having the opportunity to open conversations across generations, and I guess it being such a tricky and like quite tangled subject, I guess it was really important for me that children could come with someone that they trust, and so that might not necessarily be their parents, but it didn't feel like schools was necessarily the right way to go with it. Both like in the producing of it being like, actually it's impossible, like, you know, with the Cunt Show having cancellations, but also I guess, you know, the schools find it really difficult. I don't think there's any space for teachers to be given the tools to feel confident in delivering sex education. So if children leave the show having questions and not having anywhere to go and ask them to, that felt like a really tricky space for us to be in, because the show doesn't necessarily give loads of information. It gives lots of starting points, but gives the audience agency to go and find out more themselves. And I guess like the form as well is increasingly abstract, and there's a responsibility there in terms of, you know, art and interpretation versus the real and important information. And I guess it's important to say that we are also working towards creating our own space that does provide that information, in lots of different kind of forms of wraparound activity. But yeah, that was a huge blow there.
Yeah. You sent me a brilliant PDF full of information that you're using to help venues and programmers and families and adults around the show. So can you say a little bit more about that, the kind of wraparound work that
so I guess like one of the things that I realized that I really that I didn't know before starting was how little I knew about the body that I lived in. And the show is definitely not saying that we know any more than anyone else, and that's okay because we're learning. But it did mean that it was really important for us to bring some experts in on the process. So both for the content of the show and the wraparound activity, I'm working with the School of Sexuality Education and Outspoken Sex Education, and they all work as sex educators, either for parents or for children and in schools. And together with them, we're developing online worksheets and glossaries and a podcast. Yeah, like just loads of extra content. I mean, it's become like it's really snowballed, this project, and it's always been really important to me that the show can stand on its own, But I think, yeah, again, it's interesting that it felt like there was a need not only for the show and the audience, but also a need from the venues to have all of this extra stuff in place, to have the confidence to book it, I guess.
Yeah. Another interesting thing you mentioned in discussions before is that I've gone like a ghost. Is that there's specific topics that you've chosen not to cover, and that I think is also really interesting.
Yeah. So mostly, yeah, we've decided not to cover anything that's already taught in schools, but I guess the one that like we're really steering clear of, mostly because it's a show in itself, but is porn. And that's also in the hope that the show is offering an alternative. I think like porn is something that we can't control how or when young people get access to it. And someone said at the very beginning of me doing research for this show that everyone learns as fast as the fastest person in the class. So I guess, you know, one thing that has been really interesting is the reaction to when I say that the show is for 5+. There's a bit of little intake of breath, shall we say. But we really want to equip young people as early as possible with a critical toolkit so that they can apply it, and then hopefully if and when they do come across porn, they're able to, you know, look critically and make ethical decisions and understand sexual consent and equity. Yeah. I guess the other thing that we steer clear of, or we're circling around constantly, is exploring. Yeah, I mean, I guess we explore it, but we're actively moving away from shame, because we want to present positive stories. And I guess, yeah, we've made a choice to move away from presenting negativity, although from work in progresses, it feels like that's what adults want. Adults want to see the shame and the discomfort. But I think we're wondering how useful it is to put that on stage when actually we see it everywhere already. And there's an interesting line, I'm just riffing here, but there's an interesting line, I think, in when it's not shame, but it's about wanting to remain private, and that's a choice too. And yeah, so it does make that choice a bit complicated, and we do keep coming back to it, I guess dramatically as well, because you know, when you're making a show and taking all the difficult stuff out, you're like, where's the conflict? Where's like, but yeah, maybe that's okay, because like, yeah, I guess somewhere there's conflict within ourselves, and our interpretation of what we're seeing on stage, which maybe gives a similarly dramatic experience.
Yeah, you're not the first artist to bring that up. So maybe that's something that might come up when we're all back together again. Can you just say a little bit about the point in development of where the show is at the moment? Because I know work in progress has been done, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we actually started developing the show back in 2017, and then was part of the incubator program at the Egg Theatre Royal Bath. So spent a year developing the ideas there, which is where the piece kind of escalated from 3 performers to 9 performers. And now it's back down to 7 performers. It's not finished, it's in development. It was supposed to be finished, well, now we're supposed to open it, and we had a kind of 9-week tour booked for it, but obviously that's all COVID cancelled. So we haven't been able to finish it because we haven't been able to get into a rehearsal room. But it's almost ready to go. As long as everyone still wants it, I guess. It's been, you know, it's not an easy show to sell, and I think coming out of COVID is going to be really interesting, both like for the show, but also the risk. The show was always going to be a risk for people, and I think we're going to be even more risk averse. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe it will be 20 years in development.
I'm actually going to ask all the other artists to start putting their cameras back on. But yeah, while they're doing that, I suppose that's something that's come up, is that I realised the 4 productions that we're talking with today, 3 are in development and only 1 has been premiered, which is Boff by Kropsklubben. And then, of course, my brain started going, is that a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that 3 out of 4 are still in development stage? Is it a coincidence that the one that's been performed is in Sweden and not in the UK? Or is most of that because of COVID? Because obviously all of your projects have been affected by COVID. Do you have any thoughts on that, Josie? And then we can open it up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not surprised either that all the ones in the UK are just still in development. Yeah, but also it's like, oh, I'm gutted because I was so, like, I feel like and I'm sure the others were so close to getting there. And it feels like there really could be like 20 steps back. Yeah, it's interesting as well, the context of putting it on in different places. Like, again, not surprised that the show in Sweden was able to and has gone ahead. And I guess each of our shows have got slightly different missions, and I wonder how that affects it as well. And I guess, like with COVID, you also go, well, there's a real need for any education that is outside of a home now, and also how can we as artists help on that journey and like offer things. And I think it's really difficult with this subject, because I know for me, like there's so much online and there's so much that is not safe digitally when trying to research or educate yourself on sex and relationships. And I guess we all work in theatre because we like the liveness and the like personability of it. But yeah, I think it's something that I've been like, how, or like, is there a world where a version of this show can happen online? But it would have to be a version. It's definitely not the show that we set out to make. So yeah.
I think even right in this minute, I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if this boxes on my screen, if we were all able to be in the same room, and how much that affects the discussion. I'm really bad at doing 2 things at once. So some of the questions from the audience are starting to come in, and I wondered if you guys have any questions for each other on the back of what you've heard today. And if not, I'll jump to the first. Okay, so the first question from the audience is from Vicky Mohidin. Vicky, if you're comfortable to put your camera on to ask your question, and if not, we can ask it for you.
I can't start my camera because the host has stopped it, but like frankly, I haven't like made myself as glamorous and beautiful as as is expected, so I'm all right being with my camera off.
Well, we can hear you fine, Vicky. So do you want to ask your question? Because
I'm interested in so much of this, but I think like mainly at the moment, I'm working for an organisation that is predominantly with women from a Muslim background, and I am a woman from a Muslim background, and I I feel like I explore these things and I have done like really independently of my family, which is and I guess that's not super helpful as a professional. So I'm trying to come back into like, oh, how do you engage? And so yeah, you mentioned intersectionality at the beginning, and I was just wondering if there is like cultural considerations as well, or if that's not really been part of the process. I'm just interested, actually, I guess.
Is that for me, Vicky?
I guess so, yeah. Want to take that one? If anyone's got the answer, yeah.
Yeah, it's another thing, absolutely, along with like the cultural context of different countries, but like within our own countries, where the show sits and who it's for. And I guess like I'd love to make something that is for everyone, and I think it is, but it's a choice to come, and I guess it's, you know, there are audiences that will never come to this show, and I think that's okay. We want to offer something, and we want to try to include everyone, but we'll try as hard as we can to not exclude anyone with the content of the show. I guess, yeah, we want to talk about sex with people who also want to talk about sex. And again, like in the family context, it's like as adults, we can make that choice, and as kids we should know that there is one, and what the choice is, and be given the language to make the choice and to be curious and to ask questions. But if we're not comfortable to, then we don't have to either.
Anyone else want to pick up on that, Lou?
Yeah, I think with SEX, I think the active choice to work with schools and to place it in a classroom partly encourages that conversation, because what you're also doing then is you're having a conversation with adults who know the classes that you are engaging with. So then those cultural sensitivities that you might need to be aware of, you can have those conversations prior. The team can know about them before the work would arrive. But also I think that there is something interesting in really working with the educational institution and the framework of education with a piece of work like this, because I really like kind of how Josie's framing it in terms of like chatting with people who want to talk about this. But I think there's also a process of normalizing having conversations about stuff that we've been told we're not supposed to feel normal about having conversations about. And there's something about schools that can offer that environment that is detached to a certain extent from the family unit, because the family unit in and of itself is an institution that is complicated and has its own, different kind of context. So yeah, I think that it's a kind of political choice to work with a school as well, because it does start to engage with some of the conversations that Vicky's highlighting. But I also appreciate that there's whole other context in terms of religious frameworks there that maybe we haven't considered enough as well.
Yeah. We have another question from Kirsty Bith. If you're comfortable to put your camera on, Kirsty. And I think your question is for Shotput.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Yes, thank you everyone. By the way, it's been really interesting to listen to you all. Yeah, I was really interested in something that Shotput mentioned, which was that it was harder to find cis straight young men to talk to. And I was just interested to hear more about what that process was like and making those connections, and why you think that might have been, because I think I make assumptions about why that is. I'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. And this is probably not, in a weird way, disconnected from the previous question, even though, well, we can talk about that. But it just became really clear to us that we as we were recruiting teenagers, about halfway through that process, really decided to go hard on the teenagers that show up are the right teenagers to talk to, rather than trying to convince people that they wanted to be involved in our project. And that was for practical reasons and ideological reasons. We're a really small company, and we want to be making the work rather than spending all of our time recruiting for it. But also, it just felt interesting because it's a talking medium, to get people who want to talk. Which leads on in Scotland. And well, I'll give an example. We did, thanks to some of the people in this room, we did find a group that was exclusively straight young men. And it was pretty silent. it was pretty quiet, that particular interview. So I think probably some of the, I don't want to assume the stereotypes that you have in your head, but some of those are definitely played out in, I'm not saying that it's inherent in young men to be that way, but certainly that there is a role that, a silent, strong role that, can be played out. And so you go up to that person, you're that person's scene partner, and you're like, so let's talk about something uncomfortable. And that doesn't fit with the role that they play.
But I would say when we did we had some other groups where there was cis straight young men with young women or young gay men, and they talked more in a mixed group than they would just themselves. But we needed to give a straight male voice to the podcast, because sometimes what happened would they would become the enemy for a lot of the conversations that we had. So we wanted to counteract that.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or possibly two more. So I was going to ask Phil Kingston to come, because I think his question is for all of you. Are you with us, Phil?
Yeah, I am indeed.
Hi.
Hi, just as an aside, we did some sexual consent workshops around Ireland, and we dealt particularly with an all-boys school, which was a private school, and came with a completely different response to it, which I'll post a link later on. Very interesting response. I just wanted to ask all of you, what was it like when you developed these shows in schools? I mean, to some extent, Shotput, you've answered this by actually playing the tapes, which were fascinating. But I'm very interested in what landed and what didn't land. Mamoru, you mentioned that in your piece, but all of you, if you talk a little bit about what landed and what didn't land, because I feel that that's where we really learn something, is when the young people themselves are responding to this topic.
So we did the two things at the school that, as a school residency, that sort of international festival helped us to do so, to do that. And then one is that sharing snippets of the shows with the different classes. That's S3, so 13, 14. And then that was interesting. Obviously, we did ask them to give us feedback, either in sort of writing on a small sheet of paper, or kind of also more sort of directly asking us questions. And what was good is that we visited schools with few other artists who actually sort of established some kind of more informal sort of conversation with pupils, while sort of I'm just presenting something in front of them. And then from that, we received some really interesting conversations, particularly like it's slightly to do with what Jim and Lucy just said, but we don't know exactly, but probably a sort of cis white pupil who kind of said that sort of he doesn't believe in kind of diverse fluid sexuality, or or gender identities, but I think he could consider that, or sort of it looks like a sort of, we suggested something that kind of let him talk about it more openly, about that, sort of why he thinks that there are only two genders, and then, but how he could kind of reconsider that sort of thing. That was quite a powerful thing that I heard, and I think that, okay, that if that happens, and if that sort of open conversation could start, that would be really great. And then on the other side, on the other hand, Lou and I sort of asked young people, kind of identified as LGBTQ+ to come in a sort of more, slightly more informal small group to talk about it, which was quite difficult to recruit people. And then we had only a few sessions, then the pandemic kicked in. But that was much more, I don't know, obviously so I don't, maybe Lou can articulate a little bit more about that one, sorry.
I think that those sessions tended to focus a bit more on the act of sex rather than sort of all the other kind of conversation that goes around it, and particularly what the production is doing, because as you saw in Mamoru's presentation, that kind of moment of production is actually a leaping off point to discuss a kind of like biological evolutionary standpoint of why actually we have a gender diverse population. But when we worked with the young people kind of more, it was more in very small groups, it did end up talking a bit more about notions of consent and gender stereotypes and how that sort of interacts in PSE and discussions about it, or non-PSE situations like informal discussions as well. It would focus a little bit more on that.
Lou, can you just explain PSE?
Apologies. It's personal and social education. So it's the classes that are required to take place from primary through to secondary age that discusses personal and social aspects. So a bit more kind of like world conversations and health and well-being and that kind of stuff, rather than a more formal subject matter curriculum.
Yeah. Thank you.
So is that the space where sex education takes place in Scotland?
Yeah, well, it does, but it also takes place in biology as well. So there's two different things going on.
Yeah, I have terrible memories of biology teacher trying to do that. Yeah. Does anyone else want to answer that question for Phil Shopfut?
I think that I'll try to be brief on this. What really landed with the young people was making it clear that this was a space to say incorrect things as well, for them to say incorrect things, because I think there's a lot of, this is totally my James personal feeling about the world, but I feel like we've become really addicted to virtue in a way. And the arts can be a space where we can explore things that aren't virtuous and things that are a little bit strange or things that don't fit together. And as soon as the young people knew that they could say something wrong or objectionable even, or horrible, they opened up. Whereas anytime we tried to make things sort of tidy, silence.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we told them before each interview started that this is a time for them to educate us. We're not going to educate them, and we just want them to have a conversation with each other. So we were there with questions that would prompt them, but what tended to happen was they would just keep on talking and one topic would lead into another topic. So I think it was just giving them the space to do that.
Great, thank you very much.
We have time for one more question before we get to a very short little boogie before we go. And that is from Mariam Larinzar. Are you able to put your camera on, Mariam?
Oh, hello. I wasn't expected to be chosen. Thank you. Thank you, guys. It's been really educational and interesting. Yeah, so my question was, how did you deal with like the backlash that may have come up with from the adults or people who didn't want their children or their kids to learn or to talk about this topic specifically? Yeah, that's it.
Good question, because it's always the adults that have the backlash.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's always the adults that have always a problem or are more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Who would like to pick that one up?
I can try because I'm totally with you, and I guess the thing is I mean, I'm not the best person to answer because we haven't had it yet, because we haven't done it, but we have done it to test audiences who knew exactly what they were coming to, and so I wonder what it says about the information that is being given about a show in advance of attending or booking a ticket. And also then like what happens when it's only liberal parents buying the tickets because of the content, and then how to reach the audiences who might not be comfortable in the first place. Because I guess, yeah, like throwing the question back out is like, would they come to a show called Cunt, or would they come to a show called The Family Sex Show? And that's, yeah, that's again something that I don't know any of the answers to, but
yeah,
I'll shut up.
Lisa, Gilda, do you have any thoughts on that, just because you have been out there performing?
Yes, I think we expected more resistance than we got. Yeah. Like we were having these nightmares of being banned from schools in Sweden, and we will be famous because we did this crazy stuff. But it's been totally
quite welcomed, actually.
Yeah, and quite fine.
Yeah.
And for now,
teachers are saying like, yeah, this is so great to use for the sexual education, and
yeah,
like, yeah, it's been much more positive than negative.
And also, but also we have we just premiered before the second wave of COVID, so we don't really know yet for the bigger picture. We have premiered here in our hometown, and then we went to like one other city where we have a booker that really likes us. So we don't really know for the bigger picture yet what the reaction will be. But we also have a quite recent discussion in Sweden about sexual education. So it's we had really good timing there. It can be really relevant for the bigger discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Miriam. I am so sorry to close down questions. I have like a notepad full. We have 3 minutes left. So I really hope this is something that we can pick up again with the artists here, but also with the wider sector. So I have some thank yous. Biggest thanks is to all of you, 7 artists putting together a presentation and coming to talk to us. And I know at this point in particular, that can be difficult. To Yvonne and Janice, our 2 BSL interpreters, to Karen, who's been doing all your captioning, and also to all of you for joining us. You know, it's amazing to see that in the middle of a global pandemic, there's still nearly 100 people interested in talking online at a certain point in an afternoon about this work for young audiences. So that makes us all feel good. Apologies to everyone whose question did not get through. Please feel free to email them to us, fiona@imaginate.org.uk, and we can pass them on. We are now going to ask everybody who would like to, only if you would like to turn your cameras on. We're going to play one song.